This man right here, his name is Richard Reeves. I was talking about him last year because he put out this book of Boys and Men. And I read through this book because he had a series of interviews going on. And in this book, he was talking about why the modern male is struggling and why it matters and what to do about it. So he created this whole book. He's back doing a round of interviews. This man right here, Diary of a CEO, is interviewing him, and he had a couple of clips on his TikTok page. So Richard Reeves was doing the circuits and talking about his book before he put it out. And he made this blog post, Men Can Heal. And in HEAL, this is an acronym that stands for healthcare, education, administration, and like literacy, or literature is for the L. I think it's literacy. He said, we need the same effort to get men into heal fields as women into STEM ones. And he talks about this, but in his book and even in his interviews and all of this, he's not getting to the crux of the problem. But first, let's talk about this blog post. He says, we need a massive national effort to get more men into jobs in the growing fields of health, education, administration, and literacy, equivalent to the successful campaign to get women into STEM. He says why it matters. Getting men into HEAL would be good for them because there are many jobs there. Good for the professions because they face labor shortages, and good for the boys and men using those services because they often prefer a male provider. It would be a win-win-win. And then he offers this graph. The light blue is how psychologists are going down as far as males. The darker blue is social workers and how the male share is going down. The yellow is elementary and middle school teachers that are going down. And the orange line is registered nurses, which is ticking slightly up. Now, it is a true statement that more men need to be in HEAL jobs. However, he doesn't even, and not even in his book, address the fact that it is the patriarchy's fault that men won't go into these HEAL jobs. And why is that? Because these jobs, health, education, administration, and literacy, tend to be female dominated jobs. And because they are female dominated jobs, that means that these jobs are significantly underpaid. Now, if men were to go into these jobs, they might actually have to either take these low paying jobs, or they would all have to raise the rates and wages of how much women are paid. And in order to do that, you would have to actually confront the discrepancy in how these jobs are paid and how these people are undervalued, considering they are typically female jobs. And it is true that more of these jobs, more of these men might seek healthcare and a psychologist or a therapist if they were men. But how do you get more men into these jobs when you know that they are low paying?
A number of people warned me against writing a book about boys and men because it's such a fraught subject, particularly in politics right now, and because so many people were afraid that merely drawing attention to the problems of boys and men was implying somehow less effort being paid to girls and women, that it's framed as zero sum, and it's sort of a whose side are you on question, and you have to be on one side or the other rather than just being on the side of human flourishing. One of the real challenges here is that if there are men missing from certain crucial areas of our society and our economy, that makes it harder for other men and boys to flourish in those areas. We have an education system that has a dearth of male teachers. We have a labour market where the jobs that are growing fastest are ones where we have the fewest men. And in families, there's the growth in what you might call the dad deficit or fatherlessness.
Now let's skip to this current day interview. And this man, Richard Reeves, is talking about when men self-delete. Some of the ways that these other men, the men that are taking their own lives, the way they are talking about themselves is worthless or useless. And we live in a society, and this is one of the issues that I have with this book. He never just came out and addressed the fact that many of these people are feeling like this because society, this patriarchy, has painted them into such a small box that their worth and value is connected to their manhood and their masculinity. And they are taught that they are only as valuable as their jobs. Now, if they're not getting these jobs because the jobs are not masculine and they're like the factory jobs are dwindling or whatever, then they are taking that as a hit to their masculinity. And they won't address the fact that, these jobs that are seen as female oriented jobs, they're not going to take these jobs. And the reason why these men are probably feeling useless because we're in a society that is moving more towards service. And so if we don't stop connecting masculinity to their jobs or masculinity to their authority that they wield over women, then these people are going to continue to take themselves out. So that is this particular interview. If you're on Twitter, you need to go to this man's page at doac.clips.
They looked at the words that men who did take their own lives used to describe themselves before doing so. And the two most commonly used words by those men who took their own lives about themselves were useless and worthless. I think very powerful statement that to get to that stage, you don't think you have worth. You don't think you have use. You don't think you're needed. The decision to end your own life, obviously it's complex and it varies, but in some ways it's like the ultimate signal that you don't feel as if the world is better off with you than without you. So many people who take their own lives will say something like, you'll be better off without me. I've been a burden to you. I know I've been difficult. They convince themselves that they're not wanted, they're not needed. And I believe that the most fatal place to end up in as a human being is to feel unneeded. I think to be needed is arguably the most important and constant human requirement.
Then he asked this question: whose marriage more important for? And Richard Reeves goes on to admit that marriage is more beneficial to men, and it really is. And we know that it is. There have been studies that show that married men tend to live longer. Women do a lot of invisible labor in general, even unmarried women. We do a lot of invisible labor. And once again, the patriarchy thrives because women are doing this invisible and unpaid and undervalued labor. So you pull that away, these men are struggling if they are not married. And that is what this clip goes into. Until such time as they address and figure out how these men are going to fix the issues of manhood and try to dismantle the patriarchy themselves, they will forever be in this loop of, what can we do? Because they can, like my girl YB Edit says, they can sit there and continue to look at the problem, describe the problem, how the problem smells, what it looks like, the texture of it, but they won't get to the root of it. And until such time as they do, they're going to continue to fail and flail.
Who is marriage good for? Who's it serving more, men or women?
Now, men, marriage, being with the kids and kind of with the mom, is just right now still an incredibly important way for men to feel needed, connected, involved, etc. Mm-hmm. Now, that might change, but right now it is pretty clear that they'll do better. And like if you look at the impact of being married and not married on employment, earnings, health, physical and mental health, life expectancy, huge positive impacts for men, much less so for women. And of course, if you go back, if we went the other way, like you'd say, well, actually women who weren't married were in real trouble economically until recently, right? So like women used to be economically dependent on men, but men were emotionally dependent on women. And I think we've really done a lot on the first half of that. And it's kind of revealing the second part, the fact that actually wifeless men, partnerless men, childless men, they don't do so well. In fact, they do terribly.